There is a rule in air combat that every pilot learns early and relies on throughout a career. Rules of engagement exist because the alternative is worse. The alternative is a pilot making a decision about whether to employ ordnance against another aircraft based on instinct, incomplete information, and the fraction of a second available between detection and the moment the geometry resolves the question for him. Rules of engagement are the institutional attempt to insert professional judgment into a process that otherwise has no time for it. They are, imperfect as they are, the difference between a pilot and a weapon system. On the morning of this engagement over the Strait of Hormuz, the rules of engagement did not resolve the question. They made it more precise and more difficult.
At 8:09 a.m., a Mahan Air Airbus A310 operating flight W5-1021 from Mashhad to Dubai lost primary communications on all standard frequencies simultaneously. The loss was not gradual, not a degrading signal. The aircraft was transmitting normally on 128.3 MHz at 8:08 a.m. and 41 seconds. At 8:09 a.m. exactly, all transmissions ceased. The Dubai Area Control Center attempted recontact on guard frequency 121.5 MHz on CellCal on the secondary frequency and on the emergency transponder request protocol. The aircraft's transponder continued squawking its assigned code, 2341, with mode C altitude reporting, showing flight level 240, speed 310 knots, heading 212. The transponder was working. The radios were not. A commercial aircraft over the Strait of Hormuz with all communications lost and a valid transponder. Squawk. 7600 is the standard code for radio failure, and the crew had not yet switched to it. Either the crew had not recognized the failure, had not followed the lost communications checklist, or something else entirely had rendered them unable to do so. The Dubai controller flagged the situation at 8:11 a.m. and notified the adjacent Tehran FIR. The notification also went, through a separate channel, to the E-2D Hawkeye working the Gulf sector. At 8:12 a.m., 2 contacts lifted from Bandar Abbas airbase on the Iranian coast. The Hawkeye's characterization resolved within 90 seconds. MiG-29. A emission profile, Topaz N019 radar active, climbing fast. Not a training departure profile. A scramble profile. Max power from the moment the gear retracted, climbing at 10,000 feet per minute on a heading of 172. South-southwest. Toward the Mahan Air A310, the scramble was not in itself a hostile act. The IRIAF maintained an active air policing responsibility over Iranian airspace, and a commercial aircraft that had lost communications while transiting the Strait's northern approach corridor was exactly the kind of situation that a responsible air defense authority would respond to with interceptors. The MiG-29s were doing what they were supposed to do. Their vector was consistent with an intercept of the A310 for identification and escort. Their radar was in search mode, consistent with locating a non-responding aircraft, not with targeting a hostile one. None of that resolved the ambiguity. It only established that the ambiguity was real. At 8:14 a.m., the F-35C on Cap Station 140 nautical miles to the southeast received the Hawkeye's updated picture and the tactical controller's assessment. 2 MiG-29s, climbing fast, heading toward a commercial aircraft with 186 passengers and 12 crew, over the most contested stretch of water between the Arabian Peninsula and the Iranian coast. The lead turned to bearing 315 and advanced to military power. The sky at 8:14 a.m. over the eastern Gulf was clear below 10,000 feet and hazy above it, a layer of suspended sand particulate from the previous day's Shamal wind, reducing visibility to approximately 40 nautical miles above 20,000 feet. The sun was at bearing 097 and climbing 32 degrees above the horizon,
producing a glare from the southwest-facing cockpit panels that the visor did not fully suppress. Not a factor at range. A potential factor in a WVR merge if the geometry produced a sun aspect closing.
The F-35C climbed through 28,000 feet at Mach 1.02, the AN/APG-81 in passive mode, the EW suite building the picture from the MiG-29's own radar emissions. The picture at 8:16 a.m., 2 contacts, bearing 315 at 89 nautical miles, altitude 22,000 feet, and climbing, speed 490 knots, heading unchanged at 172. The A310, bearing 308 at 74 nautical miles, transponder showing flight level 240, speed 310 knots, heading 212. The geometry was compressing on both intercepts simultaneously. The MiG-29s would reach the A310 at approximately 8:23 a.m. The F-35C would intercept intercept geometry on the MiG-29s at approximately 8:21 a.m. 2 minutes of margin. The rules of engagement for this specific scenario, IRIAF interceptors approaching a commercial aircraft in distress over international airspace, had a hierarchy. Observe and assess. Communicate and deter. Employ only on confirmed hostile act against the commercial aircraft or against U.S. forces. The hierarchy was clear in its structure and complicated in its application, because determining what constituted a confirmed hostile act required either a visual observation of an ordnance release or a fire control radar lock that exceeded the threshold for a provocation and entered the threshold for an imminent engagement. The Topaz N019 radars on both MiG-29s were in search mode, not fire control mode, not a lock. Search. At 8:17 a.m., the lead activated the APG-81 in low probability of intercept mode and built the picture with the precision that passive approach geometry allowed. Both MiG-29s in clean configuration, no visible stores, on the inboard pylons from the DAS infrared signature at 74 nautical miles. The MiG-29A's standard air-to-air loadout typically included R-60 or R-73 infrared missiles on the inboard pylons and R-27 semi-active radar missiles on the outboard stations. The DAS thermal signature at this range could confirm the presence of large heat mass objects on hardpoints, full pylons versus empty, but not the specific munition type. The inboard pylons on both aircraft were reading as heat masses consistent with loaded stores, armed, both of them, which was consistent with a standard intercept scramble where fighters launch armed regardless of the nature of the intercept, and consistent with other things. The ambiguity was not resolving. It was deepening. At 8:18 a.m., the first contact event that changed the geometry's character occurred on the EW display. The Topaz N019 on the lead MiG-29 shifted from search mode to a narrow sector scan, the beam tightening toward a specific bearing. Not the A310's bearing. A bearing 22 degrees south of the A310, approximately the bearing of the F-35C's position, corrected for the F-35C's movement since the lead MiG-29's radar had last swept that sector. The narrow sector scan was not a fire control lock. It was a refined search, the MiG-29 pilot looking more carefully at a specific piece of sky. Either the pilot had detected something on the previous sweep that warranted additional attention, or the pilot was systematically searching the relevant airspace, and the F-35C's bearing happened to fall within the current scan sector. The lead held course and held electronic silence. No active emissions. At 68 nautical miles, the F-35C's frontal radar cross-section against the Topaz N019's narrow sector scan at this geometry was, according to the detection performance models, below the N019's reliable detection threshold. According to the threat assessment models, the confidence band on those models at this specific range and aspect was not the comfortable margin of a controlled intelligence collection. It was an estimate with real uncertainty at its edges. At 8:19 a.m., the Hawkeye controller transmitted on the tactical frequency, Falcon Lead Sentry, Mahan Air A310 has switched transponder to 7600. Crew has confirmed radio failure via ACARS data link. Mechanical fault. All VHF radios inoperative. Passengers and crew confirmed aboard. Aircraft is not in distress. Repeat, aircraft is not in distress. Radio failure only. The ACARS data link, the aircraft communications addressing and reporting system that transmitted maintenance and operational data via satellite, had been working throughout the communications loss. The crew had recognized the VHF failure within 4 minutes and had used ACARS to notify the airline's operations center, which had relayed the message to Dubai ATC. 198 people on a commercial aircraft with a radio failure, proceeding normally toward Dubai, transponder correctly updated to 7600. Not a crisis. A mechanical inconvenience. The 2 MiG-29s climbing toward that aircraft did not know any of this. Their scramble had been ordered on the basis of the initial report. A commercial aircraft in Iranian adjacent airspace, communications lost, identity unconfirmed. Their intercept was correct procedure for that information set. If the ATC relay of the ACARS information had been transmitted to the IRIAF intercept controller, the MiG-29s could be recalled. Whether that relay had occurred was a question the Hawkeye controller could not answer from the information available to him. The MiG-29s continued their intercept vector. Heading 172, speed 490 knots. Altitude now 26,000 feet and leveling toward the A310's flight level 240.
At 8:20 a.m., the Topaz N019 on the lead MiG-29 shifted to single-target track.
The target was not the F-35C. The bearing of the STT emission was 183, the A310's bearing. The lead MiG-29 had acquired the commercial aircraft on its fire control radar and was building a track. Not a targeting solution, the Topaz N019 in air-to-ground or large target air-to-air track mode operated at power levels and pulse patterns that were distinguishable from an ordnance release targeting mode in the system library. This was a track, an identification track, the radar being used to precisely locate and close on a contact the pilot intended to visually inspect at range.
Standard intercept procedure. Correct for the scenario the MiG-29 crew understood themselves to be responding to.
The P-8A's passive sensors were not available to confirm this interpretation. The F-35C's EW library had it. The library's confidence in the distinction between an identification track mode and a pre-employment targeting mode on the Topaz N019 at this range, 84%. 16% of the probability distribution was an ordnance employment track that looked like an identification track at this geometry.
The lead continued closing. At 8:21 a.m., range to the lead MiG-29, 48 nautical miles. The LPI fire control solution on both contacts. Building, confidence at 68% on contact 1, 61% on contact 2. Below the employment threshold. The distance between the MiG-29s and the A310, 31 nautical miles. At current closure, the MiG-29s would reach visual range on the A310 in approximately 4 minutes.
At 8:21 a.m. and 37 seconds, the second friction event crystallized the ambiguity into something that required an immediate decision. The Topaz N019 mode changed again. The STT on the A310 did not break. But alongside it, the EW suite detected a second emission on a different frequency. A short-range, high-P RF pulse, characteristic that the EW suite resolved in 0.7 seconds as an R60 seeker activation tone. The infrared seeker on an R60 missile activates when the pilot selects the munition for potential employment. It is a pre-employment step that precedes a launch command, and its detection from a range of 44 nautical miles meant either the lead MiG-29 pilot had activated his seeker activation as a standard pre-engagement precaution for a close-range intercept of an unknown aircraft, or he intended to employ it. Both interpretations were real. Both existed simultaneously.
At 44 nautical miles from the A310, the R-60's effective range against a large, non-maneuvering commercial aircraft, well within the parameters of what was about to happen if the first interpretation was wrong.
The lead made the decision that the rules of engagement framework had been designed to enable rather than prescribe. The hierarchy permitted a deterrent action short of ordnance employment when an imminent hostile act was assessed as probable. Probable was not certain. 84% was not 100%, but 198 people at 44 nautical miles from an active R-60 seeker at an unknown level of probability above zero was the operational definition of probable in any framework that took the question seriously. The APG-81 went to full tactical power at 8:21 a.m. and 51 seconds.
The targeting lock on Contact 1, full power, AESA, track mode, fire control solution building. Range 46 nautical miles, solution confidence reaching 71% in 2.4 seconds, climbing toward threshold.
The lock was not an ordnance release. It was the electromagnetic equivalent of what every pilot in every intercept understood as a message. I have you. I have a solution. I have authorization and capability. The next decision is yours. The Topaz N019's passive detection suite registered the APG-81's full power emission within 0.5 seconds. The RWR in the lead MiG-29 pilot's helmet would be receiving the same high-frequency AESA pattern lock tone that the Iranian F-14 crew had received over Hormuz in a previous intercept, a tone not in the standard EW catalog as a known emitter, coming from a bearing the pilot's own radar showed as empty sky. The R-60 seeker tone went silent at 8:22 a.m. and 4 seconds. 3 seconds after the APG-81's lock activation. Not an ordnance employment, the sequence did not match an employment event. The seeker had been deactivated. The pilot had moved his hand off the weapons panel. The Topaz N019 STT on the A310 continued. The intercept vector continued. The MiG-29s did not turn away, but the R-60 seeker was off. At 8:22 a.m. and 22 seconds, the lead transmitted on guard frequency 121.5 MHz.
IRIAF intercept flight. IRIAF intercept flight. The aircraft you are approaching is Mahan Air W5-1021. Radio failure only. 198 passengers, proceeding to Dubai. The aircraft is not in distress. You are being tracked by a U.S. Navy aircraft. We confirm the commercial aircraft is non-threatening. Request you maintain safe separation and discontinue fire control radar track. The transmission was deliberate in every word. Not a demand, not a warning. A professional communication of information the MiG-29 crew needed to make an informed decision, information they may not have had from their intercept controller, delivered at the same moment as a fire control lock that gave the information a specific weight.
The response from the lead MiG-29 came in 11 seconds, and it was not a radio call.
The Topaz N019 shifted from STT on the A310 to wide sector search. Not targeting mode on the F-35C, search mode, sweeping broadly, the pilot trying to locate the source of the APG-81 lock on a bearing his own radar showed as empty. The intercept vector continued. The MiG-29s were still closing on the A310, but the fire control radar track on the commercial aircraft had ended. At 8:23 a.m., the MiG-29 lead reached visual range on the A310. The intercept was conducted at 500 meters separation. The MiG-29, pulling alongside the Airbus and holding position off the left wing. Standard intercept visual identification procedure. The pilot able to read the Mahan Air livery, the registration, the aircraft type. The visual identification of a passenger jet with its navigation lights illuminated, on a stable heading at cruise speed, is not an ambiguous event. The pilot held position for 47 seconds. Then the MiG-29s turned north. Not a brake maneuver. Not an aggressive departure. A measured climbing turn, both aircraft together, heading back toward the Iranian coast at 420 knots without afterburner. The Topaz N019 remained in search mode. The R-60 seekers remained deactivated. The MiG-29s climbed through 30,000 feet and accelerated gently, their heading taking them back toward Bandar Abbas at a pace that said the decision had been made and was not being reconsidered. The A310 continued on heading 212 toward Dubai, transponder squawking 7600. The crew apparently unaware that for 4 minutes and 11 seconds they had been the center of an engagement geometry they could not see and would never be informed of in any official communication.
The lead held passive track on both MiG-29s until they reached 80 nautical miles and were clearly in the egress profile. At 8:27 a.m., the lead transmitted.
Sentry, Falcon lead. Both IRIAF contacts egressing north, bearing 348, range 81 nautical miles. Mahan Air W5-1021 proceeding normally, bearing 212, range 67. No ordnance employed. All contacts clear. Fuel state bingo plus 16. Returning to Marshall, bingo plus 16. The Intercept had consumed 22 minutes of fuel at military power, a rate the cap racetrack configuration had not been built for. The operating cost of the F-35C for the 22 minutes from the redirect to the RTB call, approximately $4,400. The cost of the 2 AIM-120D rounds that had been brought to fire control readiness but not employed, $1.1 million each, both requiring seeker recertification after the engagement's temperature and G-load profile. Total direct operational cost, $38,800. The question that the operational cost calculation could not capture was the one the intelligence team would spend the next several days attempting to answer. Had the lead MiG-29 pilot activated his R-60 seeker as a standard pre-intercept precaution for a close-range visual identification of an unknown aircraft? Or had he been preparing to employ against the A310 before the guard transmission and the fire control lock changed his decision? The seeker activation had lasted 11 seconds before being deactivated. 11 seconds was not consistent with an accidental or automatic activation. It was a deliberate pilot action of a specific duration. What the duration and timing of that activation meant in terms of intent was a question the EW recording could document but could not answer. The intelligence assessment that would be filed within 72 hours of the engagement would note the R-60 seeker activation as a significant event. It would describe the 3-second interval between the APG-81's full-power lock activation and the R-60 seeker deactivation, and decline to characterize that interval as confirming or disconfirming hostile intent. The assessment would be marked with a confidence level of low to moderate and would recommend additional collection against IRIAF intercept procedures for communications loss scenarios involving commercial aircraft.
That recommendation would go into a database. The database informed future mission briefs. Future mission briefs informed future pilots sitting in cockpits at 8:21 a.m. over the Strait of Hormuz, with a fire control solution building and a seeker tone active on an aircraft 44 nautical miles from 198 people.
The debrief aboard the carrier was 41 minutes long and produced no consensus finding on the single most important question the engagement raised. The lead pilot's account of the decision to go active with the APG-81 was precise. The R-60 seeker activation at 44 nautical miles, the 16% probability that the identification track mode was a pre-employment track, and the 198 people in the A310 were the inputs. The rules of engagement framework permitted a deterrent action short of ordnance employment when a hostile act was assessed as probable. The assessment was probable. The action was taken. The senior officer conducting the debrief asked whether the same decision would have been made if the R-60 seeker had not been active. The lead considered the question for 4 seconds before answering. No. The R-60 seeker is what made it probable rather than possible. The senior officer made a note and moved to the next question. At 8:52 a.m., the Mahan Air A310 landed at Dubai International Airport, Gate B14. The 198 passengers deplaned normally. The flight crew filed a maintenance report for the VHF radio system failure and coordinated with the airline's technical operations team for a parts replacement. The aircraft would return to service within 6 hours. No passenger was aware of any event other than the announced radio communications issue.
At Bandar Abbas Air Base, 2 MiG-29 pilots completed their post-sortie debrief. What they discussed in that room, what they reported to their commanding officer, and what notation was made in the IRIAF's operational record for that morning's sortie is not available in any collected intelligence. The electronic record of the engagement, the Topaz N019 emissions, the R-60 seeker activation, the 3-second interval, the response to the APG-81 lock exists only in the U.S. system recordings that were already being processed by analysts 1,100 nautical miles away.
Both sides had made decisions that morning. Both sides had made the right decision by the information available to them. Whether the information available to each side accurately described what the other side had intended was the question that would remain open.
2 MiG-29s, 1 F-35C, 1 Airbus A310 with 198 passengers and 12 crew, 46,000 feet to 24,000 feet across the intercept altitude spread, 22 minutes from scramble detection to egress confirmation. Ordnance employed, 0. Hostile act confirmed, not confirmed. Hostile act precluded, probable. Airspace yielded, 0. Passengers delivered to Dubai, 198.
Some engagements are defined by what did not happen. This was one of them. The 3 seconds between the seeker tone and its deactivation were the most consequential 3 seconds of the engagement. They existed, they were recorded, and they will never be fully explained. The Strait of Hormuz at 9 a.m. was as it always is, 31 miles of navigable water under a sky that shows nothing to the ships below. The A310 had landed. The MiG-29s were on the ground at Bandar Abbas. The F-35C was in the recovery pattern. 3 aircraft that had shared the same airspace for less than 15 minutes had left no visible record in the sky above the water. The radar tapes kept a different record. They always keep a different record. The question is what the record means, and the Strait has never offered a definitive answer to that question.